My name is Natalie Wren. I'm 43 years old, a colonel in the United States Army with 21 years of active duty service and 4 command tours under my belt. I've spent my entire adult life following the rules, holding the line, and earning my place in a world that never made room for softness. Until the night of my promotion reception, when my own sister shoved me in front of a room full of stars and stripes. It was supposed to be a celebration, a small formal event inside the reception hall at Fort Belvoir. Senior officers, peers, their spouses, a catered spread no one touched, and speeches no one really listened to. I'd just been pinned colonel. After decades of field rotations, war zone deployments, and policy briefings, this was it, the culmination. And then she showed up, Savannah, uninvited, dressed in red like she was walking onto a talk show set. She moved across the room like she owned it, like she had something to prove. Her heels clicked louder than the ceremonial rifles, and she didn't hesitate, not for 1 second. She walked straight up to the front where I was delivering my remarks, interrupted mid-sentence. "You really never stop, do you?" she spat, her voice sharp enough to slice through brass. My hands gripped the edges of the podium, but I didn't look at her. "Savannah," I said, calm and clipped. "This is a formal event. Step back." But she didn't. She took 1 step closer, and then another, and she said it, loud enough for every starched collar in the room to hear. "You always steal the spotlight. You've been doing it since we were kids." Then she shoved me, hard. I stumbled back, caught off guard. My left foot slipped. I didn't fall, but the room fell silent. My division froze mid-toast. The commanding general's wife dropped her glass. A junior officer choked on a canapé. No one moved. The tension in that room was absolute. Then, from the rear of the hall, a voice rang out. Calm, deliberate, lethal. "Touch my wife again, and your life is over." Major General Eli Bridger had entered the room. 2-star, black ops background, ice blue eyes. He walked forward slowly, his dress uniform impeccable. He didn't shout, he didn't posture. He just looked directly at Savannah like he could see every ounce of bitterness under her skin. She turned white, not pale, white, as if her blood had dropped out through the soles of her expensive shoes. The MPs didn't need a cue. They stepped forward from the wall, neutral, silent, and stood beside her. Savannah blinked, looked at me, and hissed, "You let him call you that?" I said nothing, because honestly, in that moment, I didn't know what stunned me more, the fact that he'd called me his wife, or the fact that it didn't feel wrong. The MPs escorted her out. No struggle, no scene, just the soft, echoing sound of her heels leaving the room. The weight of every eye turning from her to me. My hand was still gripping the podium, the wood pressing into my palm. Someone cleared their throat. Another adjusted their medals. The general remained by the wall, silent now, unreadable. And I didn't speak. I didn't finish my speech. I didn't even move. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't just standing in the aftermath of a public humiliation. I was standing at the edge of a storm I hadn't seen coming. Later, someone would upload a blurry photo of me from that night. Shoulders squared, mouth tight, eyes unreadable. They'd caption it with a quote, "My sister pushed me at my promotion reception. She accused me of always stealing the spotlight." Then a general walked in, looked at my sister, and said calmly, "Touch my wife again, and your life is over." The room fell silent. She went pale and was escorted out. I became a headline without trying. But I wasn't angry, not yet. Because what I didn't know then was that the real battle, the one I'd spent years avoiding, had only just begun. And this time, the enemy wasn't across an ocean. She'd been born in the same hospital, carried the same last name, and knew exactly where to strike. I wasn't going to fall, but I'd be damned if I didn't fight back. I didn't fall that night, but I didn't stand steady either. I held my posture in front of those officers like I'd trained myself to do. Years of inspections and briefings had taught me how to control my breathing, how to keep my eyes level, how to let shame roll off my shoulders without cracking. But inside, I was already spiraling back into memories I'd locked behind steel doors. Savannah was always the golden one. She had curls that bounced and a laugh that filled a room. My mother once said she could light up a funeral with that smile. And Savannah took that literally. She wore a coral dress to our father's burial, full makeup, no veil. She cried exactly once for the photo. And I stood next to the casket in full dress uniform, metals dull under the gray sky. I had flown in on emergency leave from Kuwait. 46 hours of travel with one change of clothes, 2 hours of sleep, and no time to prepare for what came next. When I stepped into the chapel, Savannah looked at me like I was the funeral crasher. "You didn't even say goodbye to him," she whispered, through gritted teeth. "He asked for you." I opened my mouth to explain that the mission had locked down, that I hadn't even been allowed to check a personal email, but she didn't care. She turned away. Later that evening, after the reception, she threw her glass of wine at my feet. It shattered across the hotel lobby floor. "You always get to leave," she said. "You always get to disappear and come back just in time to look like the hero." That was Savannah, all fire, all performance, all rage that burned out of control the moment she wasn't center stage. When we were kids, I used to think it was just personality. Some people are meant to be sunshine, others, shade. But as we got older, I realized it was more than that. It was entitlement wrapped in resentment. She needed applause, and when she didn't get it, she lashed out at whoever was still clapping for someone else. She was engaged once, to a man named James, a defense contractor, clean-cut, kind in the way that doesn't fade. They had a child together, Elena. Bright eyes, quiet voice, always clinging to Savannah's leg like she didn't trust the ground. That marriage didn't last. Savannah blamed the system, said the army cost her a family, because it warped me and made me unrecognizable. "She used to follow me around like a puppy," she told James once, loud enough for me to hear. "Now she follows orders and doesn't care who she steps over." I didn't respond. I never did. I'd learned long ago that some wars weren't worth fighting. Instead, I worked, I deployed, I promoted. I earned my rank the same way I earned everything else, by staying out of her way. That's the irony, isn't it? She said I stole the spotlight, but I'd spent my entire life trying not to be in hers. When I commissioned, she laughed. "When did you start liking rules?" she said, rolling her eyes. "Since when did you want to be invisible?" I didn't answer her then, but I've rehearsed my response every day since. Not because I needed her to hear it, but because I needed to remind myself. I didn't join the army to disappear. I joined because it was the only place I didn't have to apologize for being who I was. Savannah danced on tables. I briefed superiors. She wore chaos like perfume. I wore silence like armor. And every time she felt ignored, she reached for the closest match and tried to set my world on fire. But that night at the reception, I wasn't prepared for how far she'd go. Not the words, not the shove, not the fury in her voice when she hissed, "You always steal the spotlight." Because for the first time, I realized she didn't say it to wound me. She said it because she believed it. And belief, misguided or not, is more dangerous than any lie. I stood still while the MPs took her out, but in my chest, something was cracking. Not a break, not yet, but a shift. Like the first pull of thread unraveling the seam of everything I thought was stitched tight. And I told myself one last time, as I stared at the door she disappeared through. I didn't run. I just learned to stand where I wouldn't be blamed for shining. The hallway outside the reception was cold, quiet, except for the distant hum of the catering crew cleaning up and the low voices of junior officers awkwardly filing out. I stood near the side exit, facing the darkened parade field, the sound of my own breathing louder than I wanted to admit. I'd made it almost 15 minutes before he found me. "Colonel Wren," he said. Not quite formal, but not casual either. I turned slightly, not enough to face him fully. "General." Eli Bridger wasn't in a rush. He approached with the same unshakable calm he always carried. Boots polished, posture perfect, and a presence that demanded attention even in silence. He stopped beside me, didn't speak right away. I could feel the weight of his gaze, not prying, just steady. Finally, he said, "I had to stop her." That was getting out of control. I didn't answer. His voice softened. "Calling you my wife. It was the fastest way to shut it all down. Nobody questions a 2-star protecting his spouse." That word again, wife. It hung between us like a firecracker that never exploded. I folded my arms, So I was, what? A shield? A tactic? He hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. No, he said. But not entirely not that either. Honest. Too honest. It was always his curse. I looked straight ahead. The parade field shimmered faintly under the floodlights. A place where we'd once run drills in the rain, where soldiers had taken oaths and colors had been retired. A place where you stood your ground or you didn't belong there at all. I asked without turning, "Did you think I couldn't handle her?" "No," he said. "I knew you could." "So you stepped in anyway." "Yes." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. We stood in silence for a moment longer, the air between us neither warm nor cold, just tense, like a question that didn't want to be answered. I spoke next, but not to confront him, just to say it out loud. "You could have let me fall." "I wouldn't have. I didn't need saving. I know." He exhaled quietly, a breath through his nose, like he was choosing his next words carefully. "But I didn't do it to save you, Natalie. I did it because watching her treat you like that, it wasn't just inappropriate, it was personal." I finally turned to face him. His eyes didn't waver. They never did. There was something in them, something unspoken, and dangerously close to vulnerable. I hated that I recognized it. I wanted to be angry. I should have been angry, but all I felt was confusion tangled with exhaustion. "You didn't owe me that," I said. "I know." "Then why?" His answer came quieter than I expected. "Because you've spent too long standing alone. And you shouldn't have to. Not always." I felt the words before I processed them. Not just heard them, felt them. And for one split second, I was 14 again, standing outside my childhood home, listening to Savannah yell at me through the door because I'd forgotten to bring her lipstick to school. It felt the same, being told I wasn't enough on my own. But this was different. This wasn't someone trying to shrink me. This was someone trying, however clumsily, to stand beside me. And that was what scared me most. Because I didn't know what scared me more. The fact that he called me his wife in front of everyone. Or the fact that I didn't hate him for it. "You didn't ask," I finally said. "I didn't think I had time." That's not an excuse. It's not meant to be. Another silence. I shifted my weight, suddenly aware of how tired I was. My uniform felt heavier than it had during deployment. My shoulders ached, not from standing too long, but from carrying too much that I never put down. Bridger looked at me one last time, then stepped back. "I'll have a formal apology sent to your office, from the command, for what happened tonight." "That won't fix anything," I said. "I know." He paused before leaving. "But maybe you'll let someone stand with you next time." And with that, he walked away. No salute, no goodbye, just the soft, rhythmic click of his boots on tile, disappearing into the shadows. I didn't follow. I stood there, letting the air settle, and I thought, maybe I didn't need saving. But maybe I didn't want to be alone either. The knock on my office door was sharp, twice, deliberate. It wasn't a sound I feared. I'd faced worse at forward operating bases in Afghanistan. But something about the rhythm, the timing, made my stomach turn. "Come in," I said, eyes still on the after-action report I'd been reviewing. It was Lieutenant Keating, quiet, competent, and oddly formal today. He handed me a folded envelope. The moment I saw the seal, JAG, I knew this wasn't a drill. "Colonel Wren," he said, voice steady but low, "you've been summoned. There's a preliminary review scheduled tomorrow morning, Eero 900. Legal Services Division." "For what?" He didn't answer right away. "I'm not authorized to brief you, ma'am." That told me everything I needed to know. I waited until the door closed behind him before opening the envelope. The letter inside was short, clinical, a courtesy notification about a formal inquiry regarding allegations of conduct unbecoming an officer, abuse of authority, and coercion. I stared at the page like it had been written in another language, but the name at the top, Savannah Ann Leclerc, my sister. Again, there was an attached statement, pages and pages. I didn't read them all right away. My eyes locked on a few lines. The incident at the promotion reception was not isolated. I have endured years of manipulation, military-backed intimidation, and emotional abuse at the hands of Colonel Natalie Wren and her commanding officer, General Eli Bridger. This culminated in a physical threat made in a public setting, intended to silence me through fear, leveraging military rank and institutional power. I sat there frozen, my fingertips going cold despite the heat pumping through my veins. It wasn't just personal now, it was official, it was public, and it was strategic. The documents were professional, well-formatted, legally phrased, emotionally compelling in all the ways Jag couldn't ignore. She had crafted this with care. Or rather, someone had helped her do it. Screenshots of emails, some were real, many were doctored. Text messages between us from nearly a decade ago, edited to remove her provocations and exaggerate my coldness. Photos, too. One from my deployment where I looked exhausted, twisted with a caption that read, "She threatened to have me committed if I spoke out." There were even copies of what appeared to be a journal she'd allegedly kept, conveniently backdated, printed, annotated, complete with false entries about me calling her a disgrace to our family and threatening to destroy her with classified power. It was like watching someone paint a monster using your face. But they believed it was you. No, worse. They didn't believe it. They knew it wasn't true. They just didn't care. I pressed my hand to my sternum, steadying the shallow thrum of panic building in my chest. I've survived war zones, ambushes, friendly fire, nights under mortar shelling with nothing but sandbags and prayer. But this felt like being hunted without a weapon. I stood, but didn't move. I couldn't. The room felt smaller, like the walls had shifted closer. I forced myself to breathe, counting backward from 4, the same way we did under incoming fire. I looked at the final page in the packet. Savannah's closing statement. "I am not doing this for vengeance. I am doing this for protection." That line almost made me laugh. Protection? She'd stormed into my life with fury, dressed it in righteousness, and was now calling it self-defense. I didn't know if Bridger had received notice yet, but I suspected he would soon. The inquiry would drag him into the spotlight, perhaps even compromise his clearance, reputation, or career. She had crafted this to burn us both. And in the worst twist of all, she might succeed. Because in a system where perception becomes truth, and silence is mistaken for guilt, evidence doesn't have to be real. It just has to be believable. And Savannah had always been good at being believable. She had charm, tears, a knack for just the right amount of vulnerability. And when weaponized, those were far deadlier than any firearm I'd ever trained with. I thought war made you immune to betrayal, I whispered to myself. But betrayal isn't bullets. It's people who once knew your middle name. I closed the folder and placed it neatly on my desk. This wasn't a battle I could fight in uniform. This was going to require something I wasn't trained for. Restraint, tactics, and most terrifying of all, trusting that the truth might still matter. The first time I noticed it, it was subtle. Lieutenant Forbes used to nod at me each morning in the corridor, just a small, respectful tilt of the head. That morning, he looked right past me like I wasn't there. I told myself I was imagining it. I wasn't. By noon, the silence had shape. It moved like smoke through the base, wordless but thick. My own name echoed back at me from doorways that closed too fast, from conversations that stopped mid-sentence when I walked into a room. Rumors, I knew, moved faster than truth. But in the military, rumors were blood in the water. And I could smell the sharks circling. My inbox, once filled with routine updates and reports, now sat strangely still. Fewer messages, fewer CCs. Requests that used to land directly in my hands were now quietly rerouted. Like people were giving me space, but not the kind born of respect. They were waiting for something. Martinez, chief technical officer, one of the few people I'd trusted implicitly, hadn't stopped by in 3 days. He usually brought coffee, updates, half jokes about malfunctioning drones. But now, not even a glance. I finally approached him in the hangar, where he was hunched over the guidance array. "Something wrong with the stabilizers?" I asked. He didn't look up. "No more than usual," he said flatly. I waited. When the silence stretched too long, I added, "We haven't talked much this week." His jaw tightened. "You've been busy, ma'am." Not Natalie, not even Colonel. Just, ma'am. "Martinez." "Look," he said, standing upright, finally meeting my gaze. "I don't know what's going on, okay? And I'm not trying to get in the middle of it." I opened my mouth to explain, but he cut me off. "And frankly, I don't want to know. I've got 2 kids. I need this job. So, whatever that mess is, maybe keep it out of here. That hurt more than it should have. Martinez had held my side when I took shrapnel. He once sat with me 6 hours straight when we lost a drone operator. And now I was a liability. It wasn't just him. Logistics staff left memos instead of coming to my office. One of the junior analysts stood up and left the break room when I sat down. Even the base chapel, where I'd often gone for quiet reflection, felt different. Emptier when I was inside, like people avoided praying near me. Bridger wasn't spared either. Word came down that he was being placed on temporary administrative suspension, pending investigation. The phrasing was careful, neutral, but the impact was immediate. His portrait was quietly removed from the command hallway. A new colonel was temporarily assigned to cover his duties. I called him that night. "You knew this was coming," I said. "Of course I did," he replied. "It's protocol. Standard procedure." He tried to sound indifferent, but I heard the strain behind it. "I didn't want you caught in the blast radius." I closed my eyes. "We're both in it, Eli, and she's the one pulling the pin." He didn't answer. I used to think the truth was a shield. But the truth doesn't deflect whispers. It doesn't erase suspicion. In an institution built on perception, truth is just quiet. And Savannah knew that. She didn't have to prove anything yet. She just had to seed enough doubt. And every glance that avoided mine, every hallway that grew quieter when I entered, was proof that her plan was working. I overheard a conversation between 2 junior officers near the mess tent. They didn't know I was there. "She always seems so put together," one whispered. The other snorted. "That's the scary part. They didn't say my name. They didn't have to." I stood there in the shadow, listening to how quickly the image I had built over decades, an image of competence, loyalty, earned rank, was unraveling because of one lie told well. One rumor whispered just right. In war, you fight to survive. In disgrace, you fight to exist. I wasn't losing rank. I was losing belief, not just from others, but from myself. And that was something no protocol could fix. It was just past 2 in the morning when the phone rang. At first, I thought I was dreaming. The ringtone, soft, insistent, felt like a ghost whisper tugging me back from a restless sleep. I sat up, heart pounding. Calls at that hour were never good news. The caller ID didn't make sense at first. James McAllister. It had been years since I'd seen his name. The last time we'd spoken was during my father's funeral, where he'd stood awkwardly beside Savannah, holding their son's hand like it was the only thing tethering him to the ground. I hesitated, then answered. "Colonel Wren," he said, voice low but urgent. "I'm sorry to call like this, but I have something you need to hear." I swung my legs off the bed. "What is it?" He let out a breath. "Let me start with this. I'm fighting for custody of Benjamin. And I didn't reach out to help you, at first." That part didn't surprise me. He continued. "My lawyer and I hired a digital forensics team. We needed to understand Savannah's state of mind, her stability, her plans. We dug through everything, old phones, cloud backups. And I found something you need to hear." My stomach tightened. He played the recording. It was Savannah's voice, sharp, mocking, intimate. "It's simple," she said. "All I need to do is make her snap in public. Just one moment, just one little push. She's military, trained. That makes her dangerous. They'll assume the worst. The press will eat it up." Pause. Then laughter. "She's been too perfect for too long. All I have to do is light the match." I closed my eyes, bile rising in my throat. I remembered the promotion reception, how she'd appeared like smoke, uninvited, venomous, how she'd shoved me, how the silence had frozen the room. She didn't come to confront me, she came to destroy me. "There's more," James said. He forwarded screenshots, text threads where Savannah outlined a timeline, emails with subject lines like psychological pressure points, even a draft letter she never sent titled Emergency Behavioral Concern, Natalie Wren. She'd been planning this for years. She started laying traps when I was still a lieutenant colonel, before Bridger, before my 3rd deployment. While I was overseas, she was drafting narratives. I asked James, "Why now? Why send this now?" His voice cracked slightly. "Because I realized, if she's willing to do this to you, what's next for Ben?" I sat with that. Not just the betrayal, but the strategy behind it. My sister hadn't just resented me, she'd studied me. She knew how much I valued control, how rarely I raised my voice. So she bet everything on making me lose composure, just once, so she could rewrite everything I was. But she hadn't expected silence. She hadn't expected Bridger. She hadn't expected me to not fight back in the moment. That hesitation, that self-control, had bought me time. And now, time had brought me James. I asked, "Can your lawyer authenticate all of this?" He didn't hesitate. "Already in motion. We'll have affidavits and timestamps by tomorrow morning," I whispered. "Thank you." He cleared his throat. "This doesn't mean we're suddenly on the same team, but for what it's worth, I always thought you were the only sane one in that family." I ended the call feeling equal parts vindicated and hollow. Truth was coming, but it felt less like a shield, more like a scalpel. It would cut clean, but it would still cut. I backed up the files 6 different ways. Cloud, external drive, encrypted email, one printout in my gun safe. Then I sat on the floor of my quarters, knees drawn up to my chest, and exhaled everything I hadn't allowed myself to feel. This wasn't just about my career anymore. It was about rewriting a legacy Savannah had tried to smear, word by word, lie by lie. But I had a voice, and now I had proof. She had tried to set fire to my life, but the match was still in her hand. And I was the one standing over the ashes, ready to speak. The ruling came down on a Friday afternoon, the kind of afternoon where the sun hits your office blinds at the perfect slant to cast long shadows across your desk. Neither warmth nor warning, just presence. I was sitting alone when the JAG liaison called. Her voice was clipped, official but not cold. "Colonel Wren," she said, "the review board has closed the inquiry. You and General Bridger are cleared of all misconduct." I didn't exhale, not yet. "There will be no further action, no hearing. The claims have been proven fabricated. You're free to resume." She paused, and that pause meant more than the words before it. "You're free, ma'am. That's all." The line clicked off. That was it. No apology. No press release. Just a dry dismissal of the most personal public wound of my career. I sat back in the chair and stared at the corner of the ceiling. I was free, but I didn't feel returned. I didn't feel restored. Later that evening, they handed Bridger the same outcome. No charges, no disciplinary action. But he wouldn't return to command either. Interim reassignment, they called it, which was code for, "You've been cleared, but you're still radioactive." I remember the first morning I walked back into base housing. No salute from the young lieutenant who used to stop mid-jog to greet me. No nod from the logistics captain who once quoted my after-action reports like scripture. The silence was different now, not stunned, but selective. Truth had triumphed, but it hadn't healed. It hadn't fixed the stains on my reputation. It had only bleached them into visibility. I requested my old post 3 times. Each time I was told it was under review or pending chain of command alignment or not the right time. They didn't have to say it outright. No one wanted to be the one to reassign me, to defend that choice when the whisper network still pulsed. It didn't matter that James's recordings had torn Savannah's lies open. Didn't matter that the timestamps had proven the messages fabricated, the photos doctored, the journal entries ghostwritten. In the minds of some, I'd still stood too close to scandal. Bridger and I had never shared a room off duty, never crossed a line. But to the world outside, that didn't matter. They didn't need truth. They needed comfort. And I was no longer comfortable. I wasn't guilty, but I wasn't welcome. No court declared me unfit, but no hand reached out to pull me back either. The strangest part? I didn't even blame them. Fear moves faster than facts. And in institutions built on order, sometimes clarity is more disruptive than confusion. They didn't want to not believe me. They just didn't want to deal with me. Bridger said it best when we met, quietly, in the chapel after hours. He stood at the back pew, staring at the stained glass. "They say freedom is when the chains fall off," he said. "But sometimes you only get to trade them for quieter shackles." I asked him, "Do you regret it? Calling me your wife?" He didn't turn around. "No," he said. "But I regret that it cost you something I can't give back." I wanted to tell him it was worth it. I wanted to say thank you. but all I could think about was how I used to walk into strategy briefings with my head high, and now I counted how many people looked down when I entered the room. Truth had done its job, but justice had stayed quiet. The damage Savannah did wasn't just to my name, it was to the space I used to belong to, and no matter how clean the slate, the crack in the floor remained. So I did what soldiers are trained to do, I adapted. Not because I wanted to, but because that's what survival looked like now. I requested reassignment, not to command, but to training, to policy, to the margins of the system that had once celebrated me. I taught rules of engagement to officers who'd once reported to me. And every time I passed the room where my photo used to hang, I didn't flinch, because truth doesn't heal immediately. It doesn't stitch you up in applause and restore your old rank with a handshake. It just opens the door and waits to see if you're brave enough to step through. The hallway outside room 412 was too quiet for a hospital. No machines beeping, no footsteps echoing. Just that sterile stillness, the kind that made your own breath sound too loud. I hadn't planned on seeing her. I came for Mom, just for Mom. But when I turned the corner, Savannah was already there. She was seated by the window, barely recognizable. No eyeliner, no heels. The same woman who once stormed into a promotion ceremony in 4-inch stilettos and an $800 coat. Now wore hospital socks and an oversized hoodie that didn't fit her shoulders. Her arms were thinner, her hair tied back in a loose knot. No performance, no fire, just Savannah. She looked up when I stepped in. No smirk, no bitterness, only silence. For the first time in my life, my sister didn't try to be anything, not powerful, not prettier, not louder, just a person. Mom was asleep, tubes in her arms, lips parted slightly. Savannah didn't speak until I sat in the chair across from her. She didn't make room, didn't move away either. Her voice was hoarse, like she hadn't used it much lately. I thought you wouldn't come. I came for her, I said. She nodded. I know. We watched Mom's chest rise and fall, machines ticking time we couldn't control. Then Savannah said something I never expected. I just wanted to be like you. I just didn't know another way to get there. I didn't respond. Because what could I possibly say to that? She kept going. I was angry all the time. Not because you had more, but because you had clarity, purpose. When you walked into a room, you belonged there. People listened to you. No one doubted why you were there. She looked down at her hands. I spent my life trying to be chosen. You just were. I thought, if I could make you stumble, maybe people would finally look at me, see me, love me. Her voice cracked on that last word. Love me. And for a second, just a second, I didn't see the woman who forged documents or weaponized lies. I saw a child in a sequined dress, looking for her mother's applause. Savannah wiped her face, then looked at me, not defiantly, not even apologetically, just honestly. I know what I did. I'm not asking you to forget it, or forgive it, but I needed to say it out loud, because no matter how much I screamed, I was never louder than your silence. I didn't cry, not out of strength, out of caution, because tears are currency in families like ours, and I didn't want to trade any more. I didn't come to heal her. I came to see if she still had claws, but instead I found a ghost. I stood up. Savannah didn't flinch. I could have walked out, could have let the door close behind me like a judge's gavel, but I didn't. I stepped forward, placed a hand on her shoulder. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't love, it was something in between. She looked up at me, eyes wide, lips parted, but I said nothing. Because some things don't need words. They just need boundaries. And mine was this. I wouldn't forget, but I also wouldn't feed the fire. Forgiveness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet refusal to keep fighting. I turned toward the door. Behind me, Savannah whispered, not to me, but to herself. I'm sorry I made you my enemy. And then, I left. Later, people would ask if I'd made peace with my sister. And I'd say, peace isn't always a treaty. Sometimes it's a ceasefire you choose to uphold alone. And in that moment, in that sterile room, beside the mother who had failed us both, I chose quiet. not for her, but for me. The call came on a Thursday. It wasn't dramatic. No presidential seal, no urgent courier, just a simple email. Subject line, Federal Invitation, Deputy Director of Civil Military Ethics. I almost deleted it, thinking it was some automated veteran survey, but something told me to open it. Inside was a letter, signed and stamped by the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense. Your demonstrated integrity during complex ethical adversity has been reviewed by our Civil Military Transition Board. On behalf of the Department of Defense, we would like to formally invite you to serve as Deputy Director of the newly established Civil Military Ethics Program. I had to read the line 3 times before it registered. They weren't just asking me to rejoin, they were asking me to lead. A new department, a new mission, to train rising officers, not in tactics or weapons, but in moral clarity. Not everyone would see it as glamorous, but for someone who had spent a lifetime standing at the blurred edge between duty and truth, it was everything. Still, I didn't say yes immediately. Instead, I requested a quiet meeting with the board chair. We met in a windowless office just outside the Pentagon, the kind of place where real decisions happen. No marble floors, no ceremony. The chairwoman was a soft-spoken civilian with eyes sharper than a sniper's scope. "I'd just like to know," I said after the formalities, "who recommended me?" She smiled gently and slid a document across the table. I unfolded it. Typed neatly on official stationery was a letter of nomination, signed by retired General Thaddeus Bridger. Major Natalie Wren has demonstrated the rarest quality in any military leader: restraint in the face of ruin. She acted with composure under personal attack, never weaponized her rank, and upheld the core values of service above self. I endorse her without reservation, not because she is flawless, but because she chooses the hard path when no one is watching. I stared at the signature. No rank, no seal, just his name and a quiet exit he had never told me about. He had stepped down silently, disappeared from headlines, let the whispers fade, so that I could rise without his shadow. He never called, never asked for thanks, and somehow, that made it matter more. When I stepped out of that meeting, Washington was in full bloom. Cherry blossoms dancing across the sidewalks, tourists laughing near the mall. I walked alone past the reflecting pool, watching the monuments catch the light, and I realized something. I had been waiting for validation from the same institutions that nearly broke me, but this wasn't validation, it was recognition, not for who I had once been, but for who I refused to stop being. That night, I drafted my reply. I didn't write like a soldier, I wrote like a woman who had been through fire, and still chose clarity over comfort. I accept this role with humility, not because I seek influence, but because I believe silence can be as damaging as betrayal. If this program can give future officers the courage to pause before acting, to question power instead of abusing it, then I will serve with everything I have left to give. When I hit send, I didn't feel triumph. I felt steadiness, a weight not lifted, but replaced, with purpose. Later, someone asked me if I thought Bridger's letter was a last gift, a parting shield for the woman he once claimed as wife in a moment of chaos. Maybe, but to me, it was a map. He didn't clear the road, he just reminded me I was still on one. And now I would lead others through that terrain, not to be perfect, but to be prepared. And that was enough. I never talked about that night. Not really, not beyond the sanitized report or the press statement written by a public relations officer who thought regretful incident sounded more palatable than family humiliation. But now, months later, after the letter, after the offer, after the dust had almost settled, I realized something was still lodged inside me like shrapnel. And it wasn't anger, it was the silence I kept, about how it actually felt when she pushed me. We were standing in the middle of the banquet hall. I had just finished thanking my unit. There was light laughter, scattered applause, the clink of crystal glasses, a sense of ceremony, of closure. And then Savannah appeared, like a storm that doesn't roll in from the distance, but crashes right through the ceiling. Her voice was sharp, her words rehearsed. "You always steal the spotlight, Natalie, always, like a parasite that feeds on attention." I remember the sudden quiet, the way forks paused halfway to mouths, how the air thickened, not with tension, but with disbelief. And then she pushed me. It wasn't a hard shove. It wasn't enough to make me fall. But it was enough to wake every memory I'd locked away. People said I stood still, that I handled it with grace. But that's not what it felt like from inside. I didn't feel humiliated. I felt hollow. Because somewhere in my bones, the gesture wasn't new. It was simply a louder version of what she'd always done, just now, with an audience. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even angry. I was accustomed. I had been pushed in quieter ways for years, with words, with absence, with applause she demanded and I was told to clap for. There were childhood mornings when she'd ruin my school projects, and our mother would laugh and say, "She's just spirited." Teenage years when she took my clothes, my music, even a boy I liked, then made me feel small for caring. And holidays, oh, the holidays, where every toast was hers, where I was the one clearing dishes while she posed for photos. So when she shoved me under the chandelier, under the military flags, under the weight of every hard-earned bar on my uniform, what I felt was not shame. I felt like I had arrived at a moment I'd already lived 1,000 times. Only this time I didn't stumble, didn't cry, didn't flinch. I stood. Not out of pride, not out of stubbornness, but out of instinct. Out of sheer refusal to play the part anymore. When Bridger stepped in, when he said the words that silenced the room, something inside me shifted. Not because he defended me, not because he called me his wife, but because for the first time, someone else saw it. Someone else saw how far she was willing to go, and how long I had been expected to absorb it without breaking. Later, people told me I looked composed, that I embodied dignity, but if they had looked closer, they would have seen my hands trembling under the podium, my jaw clenched too tight to speak, my throat dry, not from embarrassment, but from years of screaming inwardly. I walked off that stage like I was walking out of a burning building, smoke behind me, oxygen ahead. It took me weeks to understand what scared me most about that moment. It wasn't the public scene, it wasn't the viral whispers, it wasn't even the career backlash that came next. It was the terrifying realization that I didn't hate her for it, because deep down I had accepted the pattern, and that acceptance felt more dangerous than any accusation. So when I finally told someone how it felt, when I really told it, it wasn't a confession, it was a liberation. I didn't stand to impress. I stood because I couldn't keep bending. That night didn't ruin me. It reminded me who I refused to become. And that is why I still stand. There's a podcast called Civil Echo. It's run by 2 veterans, one Army, one civilian spouse. They call themselves objective observers of the military-civilian divide. I never asked to be their subject, but one morning while making coffee, I heard my name come through the Bluetooth speaker. If Natalie Wren is really innocent, one host said, why didn't she sue her sister for defamation? Why walk away quietly? Real justice doesn't whisper. The co-host laughed. Maybe she's hiding something. Or maybe she knew a courtroom would bring out truths neither side wanted aired. I stood in my kitchen, hands trembling, not out of anger, but out of something colder. Resignation. They weren't the first, and they wouldn't be the last. Once your name's been linked to scandal, people stop asking what happened. They just assume they know. The investigation cleared me, but vindication doesn't come with applause. It comes with silence, with closed doors, with coffee shops where people fall quiet when you enter, with soldiers who used to salute with ease now offering you a hesitant nod, if that. But none of it hurt like seeing Martinez again. He had been my comms officer, young, sharp, loyal. He once said I reminded him of his older sister. He used to bring me these awful protein bars he swore by. Now, he stood outside the briefing hall where I was guest speaking. Shoulders square, eyes down. I nodded politely, thinking he'd walk away. Instead, he spoke. Ma'am, I never doubted you. But I didn't defend you either. I didn't speak up. I was scared. And I'm ashamed of that. His voice cracked near the end. I looked at him, not as his superior, but as someone who had once been terrified too. Fear is human, I told him. But how we choose to stand after we fall, That's courage. He looked up. Tears welled but didn't fall. He whispered, "Thank you," and stepped aside. That moment stayed with me longer than any insult hurled on air. The military teaches us discipline, precision, strength. But it rarely teaches us how to deal with shame. Shame doesn't march, it crouches. It makes even good men quiet when they should speak. I never blamed Martinez. I blamed the system that made silence feel safer than truth. Weeks later, an email came in. A military spouse asking if I'd speak on a panel about resilience and reconciliation. She signed off with, "You didn't strike back, but somehow, you still hit harder." It made me think of something Bridger once said, back when all this began, "A fist unthrown can still terrify." Back then, I thought he meant it as a threat to Savannah. But now, I saw the deeper truth in it. Strength isn't always about retaliation. Sometimes strength is in restraint. In the refusal to become what hurt you. I didn't sue my sister, not because she didn't deserve it, but because I had spent my entire life reacting to her chaos. For once, I wanted to choose something different. I wanted to walk forward without dragging her shadow behind me. That's not weakness, that's freedom. Not everyone understood. But I didn't need everyone to. I just needed to look in the mirror and know that I hadn't become the monster they tried to paint me as. That I hadn't picked up the same brush Savannah once used. Because revenge may feel righteous, but sometimes, the loudest justice is walking away with your dignity intact. And letting others realize, too late, that your silence was never weakness. It was power, measured, precise, and unshakable. The package was plain. No return address, no signature, just a name on the label, mine. It arrived on a quiet Wednesday morning, left at the doorstep of my modest apartment. I was between meetings, civil-military briefings that now filled my calendar, but something about the envelope made me pause. Inside, there was only one item. A folded sheet of paper. No perfume, no fancy stationery. Just my mother's handwriting, unmistakable in its slant, sharp from years of writing grocery lists and absence excuses. "When you were little," it read, "I always thought Savannah needed protection, but I should have protected you too." Mom, that was it. No apology, no dramatic confession, just truth. I sat down at the edge of my bed, reread the words twice, then carefully folded the paper and slid it into the side pocket of my wallet. I didn't cry. I took a breath that felt like it had waited years to be exhaled. Recognition doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it comes quietly, through cracked doors and late-bloomed honesty. For most of my life, I had waited to be seen. Not for medals or missions, but for who I was when the uniform came off. The letter wasn't everything I wanted, but it was enough. Later that week, I received another unexpected message, this time from Martinez. "Ma'am, we're organizing a unit dinner, not formal, just us. We'd like you there, if you're willing." I hesitated. I hadn't been back to base socially since the tribunal. I didn't know who still talked, who still watched, who had moved on. But something in me whispered, "Go." The restaurant was small, tucked in a back corner of town. Not one of those places where people posed for Instagram, but where laughter bounced off the walls and no one cared if your collar was perfectly pressed. When I walked in, a dozen faces turned toward me, and for a moment I braced myself. But then Martinez stood. Then another, no salute, no forced formality, just respect. Not for rank, but for resilience. We spent the evening sharing memories, mostly the light ones, messed up drills, late-night assignments, Bridger's legendary scowl. But in between jokes, there was something softer, something unspoken. Forgiveness, gratitude, closure. On my way home, I passed the old chapel on base, a place I used to sit in during deployments, not for prayer, but for stillness. I stepped inside, empty, quiet. I sat in the same back row as always, this time not to ask for strength, but to acknowledge that I had survived. And that survival didn't mean coming through without scars. It meant knowing every scar had a name, a reason, and a lesson. Before I left, I scribbled a line in the chapel's visitor book. I had never done that before. True justice is quiet. It doesn't need to shout. It just waits until you're ready to believe it. A few days later, Bridger and I met for coffee. He looked different without the stars on his shoulder. Softer, tired, at peace. He didn't say much, but before we parted, he placed a small worn pin in my hand. It was the same one he used to wear on his collar, one that symbolized leadership through integrity. "I kept this too long," he said. "You carried it better than I ever could." I held it, nodded, and tucked it into my jacket. Not because I needed validation, but because I had learned that legacy isn't what people remember when you're gone. It's what they carry forward because you stayed. Now, when I speak to cadets or young officers, I don't tell them war stories. I tell them people stories. About family, about betrayal, about quiet strength, and how sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is not fight, but stand and wait and forgive, and build a life not defined by what happened to you, but by what you choose to become after. I stood outside the Pentagon briefing room, fingertips grazing the watch I had worn since graduation day at Annapolis. It wasn't a fancy piece. The leather band had worn thin over the years, the silver face slightly scratched from sandstorms, ship decks, and long nights hunched over battle maps. But it still ticked, steady, consistent, like the part of me that had never broken. I had survived courtrooms, betrayal, whispers, and silence. But today was different. Today I walked into a room not to defend myself, but to speak, not to demand justice, but to give something back. Inside, chairs had been arranged in neat rows. Uniforms from every branch sat waiting, and at the back, civilian staff, diplomats, interns. Young faces, older ones, some skeptical, some simply tired. I took my place at the podium and let the silence settle. Then I said the truest words I knew. I didn't choose revenge. I chose not to be defined by my anger. Heads tilted, brows furrowed. It wasn't what they expected. But that's the thing about survival. It's rarely theatrical. It's quiet. It's a choice you make when no one is watching. A choice to stay soft when the world tells you to harden. To stay standing even when no one offers you a hand. After the session, a young Marine approached me, maybe 23, straight spine, calloused hands, eyes trying not to shake. "Ma'am," she said, "how did you keep going when everyone thought you were guilty?" I looked at her for a moment, because I knew who I was, even when they didn't. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only armor I ever really needed. That evening, I walked home slower than usual. The sun was setting behind the Jefferson Memorial, bathing the marble in amber. I passed a group of tourists, a couple arguing softly in Spanish, a man playing cello near the reflecting pool. The world, for once, didn't feel like it was demanding anything of me. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. Because for the first time, I could see myself clearly, not as someone fighting to prove her worth. Not as a shadow behind her sister. Not as a soldier in need of saving, but as a woman who had stayed true, even when it would have been easier to become someone else. Before we say goodbye, I want to thank you. Wherever you're listening from, whether it's a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a sleepless night where stories like this keep you company, I'm glad we found each other here. If this story spoke to your heart, I hope you'll stay with us, not just to hear more stories like mine, but to be part of something gentler, a community that believes in redemption over revenge, in healing over hatred, and in the quiet courage it takes to live a life with open hands. Because sometimes the miracle doesn't knock. It waits patiently until you're ready to open your heart. I'll leave you with this. I didn't win a war. I didn't vanquish a villain. I didn't scream my truth from a rooftop. I just stood still with a watch ticking softly on my wrist and chose, again and again, not to become what tried to break me. And in the end, maybe that's the loudest kind of victory there is. Thank you for walking with me. Take care. I'll see you in the next story.